A millionaire plans to humiliate his ex-girlfriend, who left him for another man when he was still poor, by inviting her to his wedding, but upon seeing his triplets, he is paralyzed. In the lavish penthouse of one of New York City's most exclusive hotels, Alexander Monroe watched the sunset over Central Park. At 42, he was the owner of the largest hotel empire in the country, with properties stretching from Miami to Los Angeles. His face, chiseled by years of hard decisions and sleepless nights, reflected the success of a man who had built his fortune from nothing. But behind that facade of success lay a wound that had never healed. The mirror reflected the image of a man impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, but his dark eyes held a pain that money couldn't erase. As he adjusted his tie, he remembered that rainy day 10 years ago when Elena Hayes, the love of his life, left him for a man with better prospects. "Mr. Monroe," interrupted Ramon, his personal assistant, walking in with a tablet. "Miss Sophia is asking if you prefer white roses or orchids for the main decorations." "Whatever she decides will be fine," Alexander replied, without looking away from the skyline. His thoughts were far away in another time with another woman. Sophia Caldwell, daughter of one of New York's most influential families, would be his wife in less than a month. She was beautiful, elegant, and came from the kind of family that would have slammed their doors in his face 10 years ago, when he was just an aspiring entrepreneur with big dreams and empty pockets. "Ramon," he said suddenly, turning to his assistant, "I need you to do something special." The assistant looked up from his tablet, ready to take notes. "I want you to send one more invitation to my wedding." Alexander walked to his desk and scribbled an address on a piece of paper. "To this person." Ramon took the paper and read the name. His eyes widened in surprise. "Elena Hayes? But sir, isn't she—" "Yes," Alexander cut him off. "Make sure she receives it. I want her there. Make it look like a gesture of goodwill, but ensure she can't refuse." A cold smile played on his lips as he walked back to the window. "May I ask why, sir?" Ramon inquired cautiously. In his 5 years working for Alexander, he had learned to read the nuances of his temper. Alexander turned, and the glint in his eyes was unsettling. "Because I want her to see what she lost when she left me for that fool." His voice was low, controlled, but thick with resentment. "I want her to see the empire I built, the fortune I amassed, and the perfect life I'll have with my new wife. I want her to know that the man she rejected can now buy and sell the man she chose 10 times over." Ramon shifted uncomfortably. "Are you sure, sir? Perhaps the past is best left in the past." "Just do as I say," Alexander replied curtly, ending the conversation. When Ramon left the room, Alexander looked out over the city again. He remembered those early years, sleeping in the tiny office of his first motel, the doors slammed in his face, the bankers who laughed at his ambitions. And then the final blow, Elena leaving him for a banking executive with a guaranteed future. The sound of the door opening pulled him from his thoughts. It was Gabriel Ross, his best friend from college and now the lead counsel for his companies. Gabriel was tall, with silvering temples that gave him a distinguished air. He had been with Alexander from the beginning, when no one else believed in his dreams. "So, you're really going to invite her to the wedding?" Gabriel asked, pouring himself a whiskey from the minibar without an invitation. "I am," Alexander confirmed, accepting the glass his friend offered. "And it will be the most humiliating day of her life." Gabriel looked at him over the rim of his glass, his expression unreadable. "Revenge has never been a good motive for anything, Alex." "It's not revenge," Alexander replied. "It's poetic justice." The two men drank in silence as the sun finally dipped behind the city's skyscrapers. What Alexander didn't see was the look Gabriel discreetly exchanged with Sophia as he passed her in the hallway on his way out. A knowing glance, loaded with a secret that could destroy all of the tycoon's plans. In her suite, Sophia Caldwell flipped through bridal magazines while talking on the phone. Seeing Gabriel pass, she smiled enigmatically and lowered her voice. "Everything is going according to plan," she murmured into the phone. "The fool doesn't suspect a thing." Meanwhile, on Alexander's desk, Eleanor's invitation waited to be sent, like a time bomb ready to change the destinies of everyone involved, in ways none of them could imagine. Hundreds of miles from Alexander Monroe's luxurious life, in a modest apartment in Philadelphia, Eleanor Hayes was returning from her job as an elementary school teacher. The building, with its faded facade and geraniums in the window boxes, was a far cry from the luxury hotels her ex had built. "Mom's home," shouted one of her sons upon hearing the key in the lock. 3 identical little boys ran to greet her. Daniel, David, and Dean, her 6-year-old triplets, were her entire world. All 3 had the same thick, dark hair and the same deep, dark eyes that she remembered so well in another face. "How were you for Mrs. Peterson?" Elena asked, kissing each on the forehead as the elderly neighbor who watched them after school said goodbye with a smile. "They were little angels, as always," the woman replied, picking up her purse. "I helped them with their homework and they've already eaten." After putting the children to bed, Elena sat in the small living room, exhausted. Her life was a constant routine of work, childcare, and financial worries since she had divorced Robert Miller, the man her father had chosen for her 7 years ago. As she sorted through her mail, an elegant envelope caught her eye. The cardstock was thick, premium quality, with the Monroe Hotel's logo embossed in gold foil. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a wedding invitation, the wedding of Alexander Monroe and Sophia Caldwell. Elena stood frozen, the elegant card between her fingers. The words blurred as tears began to well in her eyes. "Why, after so many years, would he contact me?" she whispered to herself. She glanced towards the room where her sons slept, and a chill ran down her spine. The triplets looked nothing like Robert, her ex-husband. Instead, they were the spitting image of Alexander. The phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Lucy, her best friend since childhood, and the only person who knew the whole truth. "Eleanor, how are you? I was calling to see if we could get together tomorrow after school." "Lucy," Elena's voice broke. "I need to see you now. Can you come over?" An hour later, Lucy was sitting beside her on the small sofa, the invitation on the coffee table, and 2 mugs of steaming cinnamon tea in front of them. "I can't believe it," Lucy said, examining the lavish invitation. "After 10 years, why now?" Elena ran a hand through her hair, visibly distraught. "I don't know, but it's not a coincidence. The invitation includes plane tickets for me and guests, and a suite at his most exclusive hotel in New York. He's thought of everything to make sure I can't say no." Lucy looked at her with concern. "Do you think he knows about the boys?" "No, impossible," Elena replied, her hands shaking. "I never told anyone the truth, except you. Not even my father knew I was already pregnant when he forced me to marry Robert." She glanced at a photograph on the bookshelf, showing a stern-looking older man. Her father's death 2 years ago had been both a liberation and a new source of financial hardship. "But then why would he invite you after all this time?" Lucy pressed. Eleanor sighed deeply. "Probably for revenge, to show me how successful he is now." Her eyes filled with tears. "If only he knew that I never stopped loving him, that the only reason I left was because my father threatened to ruin his career if I didn't stay away from him." Lucy took her hands. "Francis was always a monster, using his influence at the banks to threaten a young entrepreneur, and forcing you to marry that idiot Robert." "I did it to protect Alexander," Elena murmured. "My father would have made good on his threat. He had already convinced 2 investors to pull out of Alexander's project." Elena stood up and walked to the window. The city of Philadelphia glittered under the night sky, so different from the opulence of New York City. "Do you remember what Robert was like when he realized the boys looked nothing like him?" she continued. "He always knew, Lucy. That's why he treated them so badly. That's why we got divorced as soon as Dad died and he no longer had to pretend." "So what are you going to do now?" Lucy asked, eyeing the invitation. Elena took a deep breath and turned, a sudden determination shining in her eyes. "I'm going to that wedding." "What, are you insane?" Lucy jumped to her feet. "Why? So he can humiliate you in front of all of New York's high society?" "I'm going," Eleanor repeated firmly, "and I'm taking the boys with me." Lucy stared at her in disbelief. "Elena, think about this. What's going to happen when Alexander sees 3 little boys who are identical to him? Do you think he'll react well to finding out you hid his sons from him for 6 years? 7 years, Elena corrected. "And yes, he'll be furious. But he deserves to know them, and they deserve to know their real father." Her eyes filled with resolve. "He may never forgive me for the past, but I can't keep hiding the truth from him. Not when fate has brought us back onto the same path." That night, after Lucy had left, Eleanor tiptoed into the room where her 3 little boys slept. She gently stroked the hair of Daniel, the eldest, by just 2 minutes. "You're going to meet your real father soon," she whispered. "I just hope that one day you can understand why I did what I did." As she watched her sleeping children, Eleanor made the bravest decision of her life, to face the past with all its consequences. What she didn't know was that the trip to New York City would change everyone's destiny beyond what she could ever have imagined. "And we're going on an airplane, Mummy?" asked David, the most restless of the three, as Elena carefully packed their clothes into suitcases. "Yes, sweetie. It'll be your first time on a plane," Elena replied, trying to maintain her composure despite the storm raging inside her. The three little boys jumped around the room with excitement. To them, this sudden trip to New York City was a grand adventure. For their mother, it could be the moment that changed their lives forever. The night before they left, Elena gathered the triplets in the living room. She sat down in front of them, searching for the right words to explain what was about to happen. "Boys, this trip is very special," she began. "We're going to meet a man who was very important to me a long time ago." "More important than Daddy Robert?" asked Dean, the most sensitive of the three. Elena felt a lump in her throat. "Different, sweetie. And I need you to be on your best behavior when you meet him, okay?" The next day, as the plane took off from Philadelphia International Airport, Elena watched the identical profiles of her three sons, who were gazing in fascination out the window. In each of them, she saw traces of Alexander, the same shape of the eyebrows, the same smile, the same determined look in their eyes. Soon the boys fell asleep, exhausted by the excitement. In the quiet of the cabin, with the soft hum of the engines in the background, Elena drifted into her memories. She remembered that rainy day when her father, Francis Hayes, had summoned her to his study. With his authoritative voice and unforgiving stare, he had shown her photographs of Alexander, leaving various banks, all taken by private investigators. "That boy has no future," her father had declared. "I've spoken to Johnson and Rodriguez. They've already pulled their investment from that ridiculous little hotel he wants to build." Elena had tried to defend him, to explain that Alexander had vision, determination, that he just needed a chance. But her father was unyielding. "Listen to me, Elena," he had said in a glacial tone. "Either you end things with him right now, or I will make sure that no bank on the East Coast will lend him a single dime. I have the connections to destroy him, and you know it." A week after that terrible conversation, heartbroken, Elena had broken up with Alexander, making up a lie about another man. The look of pain in his eyes haunted her to this day. 2 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. By then, Alexander had already disappeared from Philadelphia, determined to prove his worth in the capital. Her father, upon learning of her relationship with Robert Miller, the son of his business partner, orchestrated a quick marriage. What he never knew was that Elena was already carrying another man's children in her womb. The landing in New York City brought her back to the present. As the taxi drove through the avenues of the capital, Elena felt her heart beat faster and faster. Beside her, the triplets stared in awe at the tall buildings and the hustle and bustle of the big city. "Are we there yet, Mum?" Daniel asked. "No, sweetie. We're almost there." The taxi pulled up in front of the imposing Monroe Imperial Hotel, the crown jewel of Alexander's chain. The building rose majestically in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, its glass facade reflecting the city's blue sky. "Wow," the three boys exclaimed in unison. "We're staying here?" Elena nodded, trying to control the trembling in her hands as the bellhop took their luggage. The suite they were given was larger than their entire apartment in Philadelphia. The boys ran from one end to the other, exploring every corner with wide-eyed wonder. That night, Elena barely slept. Tomorrow was the wedding, and the moment of truth. The morning came all too soon. As she helped the triplets into the new suits she had bought with her savings, Elena repeated to herself, today everything could change. Alexander's estate on the outskirts of the city was even more impressive than his hotel. Located in the rolling hills of Greenwich, Connecticut, the property looked like something out of an architectural magazine, its modern, minimalist lines blending seamlessly with the wooded landscape. The gardens had been transformed for the ceremony. Arches of white flowers, elegant tents, waiters with trays of champagne, and the cream of the crop of New York society dressed in their finest attire. "Stay close to me," Elena instructed her sons as an attendant guided them to their seats. Inside the mansion, Alexander Monroe was putting the final touches on his attire. The custom-made tuxedo highlighted his athletic build, and the mirror reflected the very image of success. However, beneath that perfect exterior, an unease was gnawing at him. Minutes earlier, he had witnessed something disturbing. Gabriel, his best friend, and Sophia, his fiancée, conversing in a secluded corner. It wasn't the conversation itself that unsettled him, but the intimacy of their gestures, the complicity in their gazes. Mr. Munro, interrupted Ramon, his assistant. His expression was one of concern. She has arrived. Elena is here. Alexander felt a mix of anticipation and something akin to fear. Yes, sir, and... Ramon hesitated. She's not alone. What do you mean? She has 3 children with her. Triplets, it seems. Alexander frowned, confused. Children. Elena has children. With determined steps, he headed towards the garden. His plan to humiliate Elena by showing her everything he had achieved without her now seemed insignificant in the face of this new information. As he reached the garden, he saw her. Elena was more beautiful than he remembered, in a simple but elegant blue dress. However, what froze Alexander in place wasn't her, but the 3 identical little boys accompanying her. Triplets. 3 boys about 6 years old, with thick, dark hair, piercing dark eyes, and a determined expression that Alexander recognized all too well. It was like looking in a mirror that transported him back to his own childhood. His heart began to pound as an impossible truth forced its way into his mind. The confidence that had carried him through the morning crumbled in an instant, replaced by a question that threatened to change his entire world. Could these children be? Murmurs began to spread through the guests like wildfire. Glances darted back and forth from the 3 small boys to the pale face of Alexander Munro. The resemblance was undeniable, almost uncanny. The same intense eyes, the same shape of the face, even the same slight frown. Here's like seeing 3 miniature versions of Alexander, a guest whispered to her companion. Alexander, feeling control of the situation and his life slipping away, excused himself from the wedding planner and walked directly toward Elena. The 3 boys partially hid behind their mother, watching him with curiosity. "Can we talk in private?" he asked, his voice strained. Elena nodded, telling the boys to stay with Lucy, who had come along for support. The tension between them was almost palpable as they moved to a small side room away from the bustle of the preparations. Once they were alone, Alexander closed the door and turned to her. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions: disbelief, confusion, anger, and something deeper that even he couldn't name. "Who are those children?" he asked, his voice low and tense. Elena held his gaze firmly, determined not to show the fear she felt. "They're your sons," she replied simply. The words hit him like a physical blow. Alexander staggered slightly, leaning on the back of a nearby chair. Impossible. You left me for that man your father chose." The room seemed to shrink around them. Through the window, you could see the garden where guests were beginning to take their seats. The world kept spinning outside, oblivious to the emotional earthquake shaking that small room. "I never stopped loving you," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "My father threatened me. He said he would destroy everything you were building if I didn't end things with you. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks later, but by then, it was too late." Alexander stared at her, processing every word. He remembered those dark days, how suddenly the bank's doors had closed to him, how 2 investors had pulled their support without explanation. It had all happened right after Elena left him. "Why did you never tell me?" His voice sounded hollow, distant. "I tried," she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But you had already left Philadelphia. Later, when I started seeing your name in the news, your growing success, I thought it would be selfish to reappear and complicate your life with 3 children. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, trying to grasp the magnitude of what he was discovering. 6 years. He had 3 6-year-old sons he never knew. "Are you sure they're mine?" he asked, though the answer was written all over the boys' faces. "As sure as I am that we're standing here," Eleanor answered with dignity. "If you need proof, I'm willing to do it. But just look at them, Alexander." A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, the music began to play, signaling that the ceremony was about to start. "Their names are Daniel, David, and Dean," Eleanor continued, breaking the silence. "They're good kids, smart, curious, and they've asked about their real father." "What have you told them about me?" Alexander asked. "That you're a good man who had to go far away." "I never told them anything bad, I promise you." Before Alexander could respond, the door was thrown open. Sophia Caldwell stormed in, her bridal gown radiant and a look of perfectly rehearsed indignation on her face. "What is going on here?" she demanded, shooting a contemptuous glare at Elena. "The ceremony is about to start, and you're locked in here with this woman." Alexander straightened up, regaining some of his composure. Sophia, this is Elena Hayes, an old friend. Sophia looked Elena up and down with poorly concealed disdain. And those children she brought? Everyone is talking about how much they look like you. Before Alexander could answer, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a text from Marcus, the head of security for the estate. Sir, we reviewed the cameras as you requested. There is something you need to see immediately. Alexander frowned. That morning, unsettled by what he'd seen between Gabriel and Sophia, he had asked Marcus to review the security footage from the past few days. Now, with this urgent message, his suspicions seemed to be confirmed. I have to take care of something, he said, pocketing the phone. Sophia, please tell the planner I need a few more minutes. A few minutes? The guests are waiting, she protested, but something in Alexander's expression made her back down. Fine, but don't be long. When Sophia left, slamming the door, Alexander turned to Elena. I have to see this. Can you wait here? Elena nodded, confused by the turn of events. As he left, Alexander came face to face with the triplets, who were waiting with Lucy. All three looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Are you Mommy's important friend? Asked David, the boldest one. Alexander knelt to their level, feeling an indescribable emotion as he looked closely at the faces that were almost a reflection of his own at that age. Yes, I'm an old friend of your mum's, he replied, his voice softening. My name is Alexander. I'm David. He's Daniel. And he's Dean, the little boy explained, pointing to his brothers. Is this your house? It's huge. Despite the situation, Alexander couldn't help but smile. Yes, it's my house, and I'd like to get to know you boys better if you want. The three of them nodded enthusiastically, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Just then, Marcus appeared at the end of the hall, gesturing urgently to Alexander. I have to go for a moment, he said to the boys, but I'll be back soon, I promise. As he followed Marcus to his office, Alexander felt like he was on the edge of a cliff. His life, so carefully planned, was about to change forever. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your patience. There will be a slight delay in the ceremony, the wedding planner announced, as guests began to fidget under the afternoon sun. Meanwhile, Alexander and Elena hurried to the main office of the mansion. Ramon, Alexander's personal assistant, had stayed with the triplets, improvising games to keep them entertained. Do you guys like video games? Ramon asked, trying to distract the children from the growing chaos. Yeah, the three shouted in unison, momentarily forgetting the strange situation they were in. In the office, Marcus, a burly man in his 50s with an impeccable black suit, stood waiting by several monitors. Mr. Monroe, as you asked this morning, I reviewed the recordings from the last few days, Marcus began. His normally impassive face showed signs of concern. And I found this. He pressed a button, and the screens came to life. The images showed the mansion's back garden, illuminated by the moon the night before. Sophia and Gabriel appeared in the frame, looking around to make sure they were alone. Is everything ready for tomorrow? Sophia asked in the recording, her voice surprisingly cold compared to her usual sweet tone. Gabriel nodded. The notary will be here right after the ceremony. As soon as he signs the transfer documents, everything will be in your name. Elena, watching silently beside Alexander, felt a chill. The Sophia in the footage was completely different from the radiant bride she had seen minutes before. The recorded conversation continued, each word more devastating than the last. As soon as we're married, he'll transfer everything into my name, Sophia said, her face lit by a predatory smile. The poison will be slow. It will look like a natural illness. In 6 months, we'll be free and rich. Gabriel embraced her with an intimacy that left no doubt about their relationship. And with the documents I prepared, no one will suspect a thing. His entire empire will be ours. Alexander watched the footage in complete silence, his face an impenetrable mask. Elena, horrified, gently touched his arm. I'm so sorry, she whispered. It's not your fault, he replied, finally snapping back to reality. It seems we were both betrayed by people we trusted. Marcus, a man who had worked for Alexander for 15 years and owed him his loyalty ever since he'd hired him despite his troubled past, asked, What do you want us to do, sir? Alexander ran a hand over his face, trying to order his thoughts. In less than an hour, he had discovered he had 3 sons and that his fiancée was planning to murder him. Keep monitoring them, he finally replied. I want to see just how far this betrayal goes before I act. Marcus nodded and exited discreetly, leaving them alone. The silence was heavy between them. The ticking of the antique clock on the wall seemed to amplify in the room. "So," Alexander began, turning to Elena, "do you have proof that the boys are mine?" Elena looked at him directly without flinching. "I have all their medical records and I'm willing to do DNA tests if you want. But just look at them, Alexander. They're a spitting image of you at that age." Alexander nodded slowly. "We'll do the tests, but I believe you. There's something in their eyes I recognize." After a pause, he continued, "I need you to tell me everything about your father and his threats. We need to understand all the betrayals surrounding us." Eleanor sat in one of the leather armchairs in the office. The weight of the secrets she'd kept for so many years seemed to lift as she began to speak. "My father found out about our plan to move to New York together," she began. "He confronted me with the photos his private investigators had taken. He knew about your small hotel, your expansion plans, everything." Alexander listened intently, connecting dots that had remained scattered in his memory until now. "He told me that if I didn't leave you, he would make sure you never got a single dollar of funding, that he would call every bank and every investor in his circle of influence. And he did it anyway," Alexander murmured. "After you left me, suddenly every door closed." Elena nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought if I stayed away, you'd at least have a chance to succeed without his interference. But why didn't you tell me about the children when you found out you were pregnant?" "I tried," she said. "I went to your motel to find you, but they told me you'd left Philadelphia. I left messages, but you never called back. Then, my father quickly arranged my marriage to Robert, and I had no choice." Alexander walked to the window. From there he could see the guests in the garden, Sophia talking nervously with Gabriel, and the triplets playing with Ramon by the fountain. "All these years," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, "all these years building an empire, thinking I was doing it to prove you and your father wrong, and it turns out the only thing that truly mattered I never even knew about." He turned back to her, a new determination in his eyes. "I'm not wasting any more time, Elena. I'm not going to lose my sons now that I've found them." Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "I never wanted you to lose them. I always spoke well of you to them, even if I didn't tell them who you really were." "And Robert? Did he know?" "He always suspected. The boys looked nothing like him. When my father died 2 years ago, he had no reason to keep up the charade and asked for a divorce." Alexander nodded, processing all the information. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Carlos, I need you to come to my house immediately. Bring your equipment for DNA tests. It's urgent." Hanging up, he looked at Elena with a half-smile. "He's my personal doctor, discreet and reliable." Before Elena could reply, there was a sharp knock on the door. It was Ramon, looking visibly nervous. "Sir, the guests are getting impatient and Miss Sophia is quite upset." Alexander looked at Elena, and a silent resolution passed between them. "Tell Sophia I'll be out in a moment," he replied. "And Ramon, keep the children away from her, understand?" When Ramon left, Alexander took Elena's hands in his. "We are going to fix this for our children. But first, I have a wedding to call off." The sun was beginning to set over the estate's gardens, casting long shadows over the increasingly impatient guests. Waiters circulated with more champagne to soothe tempers, while the musicians repeated their repertoire for the 3rd time. In the office, Alexander and Elena continued to unravel a decade of lies and manipulation. The evening light streamed through the windows, illuminating Elena's face as she revealed the dark secrets of the past. "My father didn't just want to control my life," she explained, pacing nervously around the room. "He was obsessed with maintaining his position in Philadelphia's financial circles. When you started talking about your innovative ideas for the hotel industry, he realized you posed a threat to his old-fashioned way of doing business." Alexander listened with clenched fists, finally connecting the pieces of the puzzle that had been his life. "Francis Hayes, the untouchable Philadelphia banker," he muttered bitterly. "Now I understand why all the investors suddenly pulled out of my initial project." Elena nodded, her posture straightening as she sat across from him, the weight of a decade of silence finally lifting. "He was afraid of your vision," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. "He wasn't just a banker. He was an old-guard gatekeeper. He knew you would revolutionize the market, that your ideas about boutique, experience-driven hospitality would make his own stale, cookie-cutter business models obsolete. He saw you not just as a suitor for his daughter, but as a threat to his entire legacy." A single tear, A relic of years of unshed grief traced a path down her cheek. He wanted me away from you and married to Robert, his partner's son. It was a merger, not a marriage. It was all about consolidating control, keeping the power within their small, stagnant circle. Her gaze hardened, the memory still sharp and painful. He used my love for you as a weapon against me. He told me, in no uncertain terms, that if I didn't leave you, if I didn't break your heart so completely that you'd never come looking for me again, he would destroy you. Not just your business, but your reputation, your future. He would make you a pariah in the financial world. Alexander rose from his chair and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He stared out at the meticulously manicured gardens where his sons, were chasing each other around a fountain, their laughter a surreal soundtrack to the tempest unfolding in his life. His mind, usually a fortress of calm, strategic thought, was a maelstrom. He was reprocessing his own origin story, the narrative of a man wronged by love, and finding it was a lie. The story wasn't about a woman's betrayal, but a father's tyranny. "And Robert?" he asked, his voice low as he turned back to face her. "Did he know? About the boys?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Elena's lips. "He always knew. Alexander, have you looked at them? They are you in miniature. There is nothing of Robert Miller in their faces. Our marriage was a contract, a business arrangement convenient for both our families. There was never an ounce of love, not even affection. We were polite, resentful roommates." Her eyes took on a distant, steely glint. "When my father died 2 years ago, the contract was void. There was no longer any reason to maintain the charade. He filed for divorce within a month. I've been struggling to raise them on my own ever since, on a teacher's salary." Alexander crossed the room in 3 long strides, a storm of admiration and profound guilt swirling within him. He stopped just before her, his hands clenched at his sides. "All this time," he breathed, the words heavy with regret. "All this time I built this empire fueled by vengeance. Every deal, every acquisition, every new hotel was another brick in a monument to my own bitterness. I thought I was proving you wrong. I should have been looking for you. I should have been looking for answers." Before Elena could form a reply, the heavy oak door to the office burst open. It was Ramon, his usual professional composure completely shattered, his face flushed and his tie askew. "Sir, Miss Caldwell is, well, she's furious. Apocalyptic might be a better word. The guests are starting to whisper, speculating about everything from a medical emergency to a last-minute bolt. Some of the more impatient ones are already leaving. What should I tell them?" Alexander's gaze met Eleanor's. In that shared look, a decade of misunderstanding dissolved, replaced by a silent, instantaneous accord. They were on the same side. "Tell them we've had a minor, unforeseen delay," he instructed, his voice a paradigm of calculated calm that belied the chaos in his heart. "Assure them the ceremony will begin shortly." Then he added, his eyes narrowing with newfound purpose, "And Ramon, find Gabriel. Tell him I need to see him in here immediately. Say it's about an urgent matter regarding the prenuptial agreement that needs to be clarified before we proceed." Ramon nodded, his expression a mask of pure confusion, but he knew better than to question a direct order. As he hurried out, closing the door behind him, Alexander turned back to Elena, the air in the room crackling with a new energy. "I have a plan," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if the very walls were listening. "But it's not something I can do alone. I need your help. Are you willing to help me unmask the people who not only tried to tear us apart all those years ago, but are now actively plotting to destroy me?" Elena rose from her chair, her back straight, her chin high. She faced him not as a victim of circumstance, but as an equal, a partner forged in the crucible of shared betrayal. "I have always been on your side, Alexander," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that cut through all his remaining doubts. "Even when it looked like I wasn't." For the first time that day, the hard, chiseled lines of Alexander's face softened. A genuine warmth entered his eyes, melting the ice that had encased his heart for 10 years. "Forgive me," he said, the words catching in his throat. "Forgive me for ever doubting you, for believing you would leave me for money." "There was no way for you to know the truth," she replied, offering him grace. "I played my part in my father's cruel drama all too well." He reached out and took her hands, the simple contact sending a jolt of recognition, of rightness, through them both. It was a connection he thought had been severed forever. "Now we have a chance to fix the past," he said, his grip tightening. For us, and for our sons. A sharp rap on the door broke the spell. Marcus, his head of security, entered, followed by a middle-aged man carrying a medical case. "Dr. Carlos is here, sir," Marcus announced. "Perfect," Alexander replied, his focus snapping back to the tactical situation at hand. "Doctor, I apologize for the dramatic summons. I need those DNA tests, and I need them as soon as possible." The doctor, a man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, nodded. "With the portable equipment I brought, we can have preliminary, legally admissible results within a couple of hours. Definitive court-certified results will take a few days. Hours will be more than enough for now," Alexander confirmed. "Marcus, please bring the boys in." While they waited, Alexander laid out the framework of his plan to Elena. They spoke in low, urgent tones, their heads bent close together, two generals plotting a counter-offensive on the eve of battle. "Are you sure about this?" Elena asked when he had finished, her eyes wide with the audacity of his proposal. "It's incredibly risky. What if they suspect something?" "It's the only way," he answered, his voice hard as steel. "I need irrefutable public proof of their intentions before I involve the authorities. I won't allow them to slither away with high-priced lawyers, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. I want this to be airtight." Minutes later, the door opened again. This time it was the triplets, who tumbled into the room with the uncontainable energy of 6-year-olds, Marcus following at a more sedate pace. "Mom, this place is amazing," exclaimed David, the most extroverted of the three. "They have a fountain with orange fish and a garden that's bigger than our whole neighborhood." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made Alexander's heart ache. She ran a hand through her son's thick, dark hair. "I'm glad you like it, sweetie." "Doctor." Carlos approached the boys with a warm, disarming manner. He knelt to their level, his voice gentle. "Hello there, gentlemen. My name is Dr. Carlos. I'm a friend of Alexander's, and I was wondering if you could help me with a fun little science experiment." The boys, their curiosity piqued by the word experiment, were immediately on board. He explained simply that he needed to collect a few cells from inside their cheeks, using a soft swab, like a little paintbrush. They cooperated without any fuss, each taking their turn with a sense of solemn importance. "And now I'll need a sample from you, Mr. Monroe," the doctor said, turning to him. As Dr. Carlos collected Alexander's sample, another knock, this one louder and more impatient, echoed through the room. It was Gabriel Ross. The lawyer strode in, an expression of annoyance on his face that quickly morphed into one of utter shock as he took in the scene before him. Alexander, Eleanor, 3 identical boys who were miniature versions of his best friend, and a man who was clearly a physician packing away medical supplies. "What in God's name is going on in here?" Gabriel demanded, stopping dead in his tracks, his eyes darting between all the players in this unexpected drama. Alexander rose slowly, schooling his features into a neutral mask. "Gabriel, glad you could make it. We need to review a few final details in the prenup before we proceed with the ceremony." Gabriel glanced nervously at the assembled company, his lawyer's mind clearly racing to process the new variables. "Can't this wait? The guests are getting restless. Sophia is—" "No, it cannot wait," Alexander interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It concerns the specifics of the asset transfers that will take place in Sophia's name post-nuptials." A flicker of avarice, quick as a snake's tongue, flashed in Gabriel's eyes. It was exactly the reaction Alexander had anticipated. "Doctor, if you would be so kind as to take the children with Ramon while we conclude our business here," Alexander requested. Once the doctor and the boys had departed, Alexander walked to the door, turned the heavy brass lock, and then faced his supposed best friend. A smile touched his lips, but it was a chilling, predatory thing that held no warmth. "Now, Gabriel," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "let's talk about your plans for my future, and your interesting theory that poison is the most discreet way to fast-track an inheritance." The air in the office grew thick and heavy, charged with unspoken accusations. Gabriel, after a moment of stunned silence, forced a laugh that sounded brittle and hollow. "What are you talking about? Poison? Alex, buddy, I think the wedding stress is getting to you. You're not making any sense." He tried to clap Alexander on the shoulder, a gesture of familiar camaraderie, but Alexander didn't move. "You're probably right. The stress," Alexander conceded, his tone shifting so abruptly it was disorienting. "My apologies. Let's focus on the business at hand, the property transfers. I want to be absolutely certain everything is in order for Sophia." A happy wife, a happy life. Isn't that what they say? Visibly relieved by the sudden change in subject, Gabriel's posture relaxed. He believed he had navigated the bizarre confrontation successfully. He moved toward the mahogany desk where Alexander had spread out a series of legitimate-looking documents. Of course. Let's make sure it's all ironclad. As they feigned a discussion about trusts and offshore accounts, Eleanor watched from a leather armchair in the corner. She was astounded by Alexander's performance. He was a master actor, his voice steady, his questions precise, betraying none of the furious betrayal that she knew was raging beneath the surface. He was playing with his prey, and Gabriel had no idea he was already in the trap. After Gabriel left, convinced that his treacherous plans were still on track and that Alexander was merely suffering from a case of pre-wedding jitters, the facade dropped. Alexander sank into his chair, the immense strain of the performance suddenly evident. He buried his face in his hands. "I can't believe I was so blind," he murmured, his voice muffled. "For more than a decade I trusted him with everything. My business, my secrets, my life." Eleanor moved to his side, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Her touch was gentle but firm. "The people we love the most often have the greatest power to deceive us," she said softly. "It's not a weakness in you, Alex. It's a testament to your capacity to trust." A moment later, Marcus re-entered the room, his presence as solid and reassuring as a rock. "Dr. Carlos is set up in the guest library. He says he'll need about another hour for the preliminary results to process." "Excellent," Alexander said, pushing himself upright, his energy and resolve returning. "What's the status on the children?" "Ramon took them down to the main kitchen. It appears Chef Antoine is teaching them how to make the world's most decadent hot chocolate with extra whipped cream." A genuine smile, the first one Eleanor had seen on his face that wasn't laced with irony or pain, lit up Alexander's features. "Good. Keep them there. Keep them happy and far away from Sophia and Gabriel." Turning back to Eleanor, he said, "Now, let's continue with our plan." For the next hour, the office became a war room. Alexander and Eleanor worked in seamless partnership, meticulously choreographing the final act of their counterplot. Marcus came and went, providing quiet updates on the guests, on Sophia's increasingly frantic state, on Gabriel's movements, and on the additional surveillance footage they were compiling in real time. "I'm going to let them think they've won," Alexander explained, pacing the length of the room. "We will proceed with the wedding, but there are going to be a few script changes that only we know about." Elena watched him, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. "Isn't that taking an unnecessary risk? What if they try something during the ceremony itself? Marcus and his team will be monitoring their every move. Every waiter, every guest, every corner of this property is under surveillance," he assured her. "Furthermore, I've had listening devices placed in Sophia's suite and Gabriel's office here at the estate. We're gathering an avalanche of evidence." As if on cue, Marcus returned, holding a tablet. "Sir, I think you'll want to hear this." "It's a live feed from Miss Caldwell's dressing room. Mr. Ross is with her." He tapped the screen and Sophia's shrill, anxious voice filled the quiet office. "What is taking so long? He's been locked in that office for over an hour. And who the hell was that woman with those children?" Gabriel's voice was a low, placating rumble. "Calm down. Panicking won't help. The important thing is that the wedding happens. Once he signs those post-nuptial documents, it won't matter if he's adopted the entire local orphanage. It will all be yours." "And what if he suspects something?" Sophia pressed, her voice verging on hysterical. "He was acting so strangely. He said something about poison." "He knows nothing," Gabriel snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. It was a clumsy attempt at a joke, a manifestation of his stress. Stick to the plan, smile, look beautiful, get him to the altar. Tonight you'll be his wife, and in a few months you'll be a very, very wealthy widow." Eleanor gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, horrified by the sheer reptilian coldness of their words. Alexander, however, remained unnervingly calm. He gestured for Marcus to stop the recording. "We have more than enough," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Marcus, have you contacted District Attorney Mendez as I asked?" "Yes, sir. He's reviewed the initial recordings from last night. He said that with this new audio there's more than enough probable cause for an immediate arrest. He's on standby, but he needs you to file the formal complaint." "I will," Alexander said, "but not yet. I want to see the looks on their faces. I want them to stand at the precipice of their victory before I push them over the edge." Marcus nodded, and slipped out of the room to continue his surveillance. "Alexander, this is too dangerous," Elena pleaded, her fear for him overriding her shock. "You have what you need. Let the police handle it now before this escalates any further." He turned to her and took her hands in his gaze intense. "Trust me, Elena. Please. I need to do this. I need them to see the full scope of their failure. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about ensuring they can never harm anyone again. It's about closing this chapter of our lives for good." A soft knock on the door made them both jump. It was Dr. Carlos. His expression was serious, unreadable. "I have the preliminary results," he announced, holding a sealed manila folder. Alexander and Elena held their breath as the doctor opened the folder and scanned the single page within. He looked up, his eyes meeting Alexander's. "There is no doubt whatsoever, Mr. Monroe. The triplets are your biological sons. The genetic compatibility is absolute. The markers match at a percentage that is only scientifically possible in a direct paternal relationship." Even though he had known it in his gut, the scientific confirmation hit Alexander with the force of a physical blow, a tidal wave of emotions. Joy so pure it was painful, grief for the lost years, a profound and aching regret washed over him. He had sons. 3 bright, beautiful boys who had spent the first 6 years of their lives without him, while he built an empire that, in a tragic twist of irony, he had almost bequeathed to their would-be murderers. "Thank you, Doctor," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Could I ask you to remain on the premises for a while longer? Your presence may be required." After the doctor departed, Alexander turned to Elena, his eyes shining with an unspeakable mix of emotions. "They're mine," he whispered, as if saying the words aloud for the first time made them truly real. "They're really mine." "They always have been," she answered softly. "And right now, they need you more than ever." He nodded, the last of his hesitation vanishing, replaced by a crystalline sense of purpose. "And I will be there for them, for the rest of my life. But first, we have to eliminate the threat." He strode to his desk and pressed the intercom button. "Ramon, inform Miss Caldwell that I am ready to proceed with the ceremony, and please bring my spare tuxedo to the office." "Are you certain you want to go through with this?" Elena asked, one last time. "Absolutely," he replied, his voice ringing with conviction. "It's time for Gabriel and Sophia to learn a very important lesson. No one threatens my family and gets away with it." Just then, Ramon entered with the fresh suit. Peeking out from behind him were 3 curious faces. "Can we go back to the party now?" David asked, a telltale smudge of chocolate at the corner of his mouth. Alexander knelt, bringing himself down to their eye level. The powerful CEO vanished, replaced by a father. "Very soon," he said gently. "But first I have a very important job for you. Would you 3 like to help me with a special mission?" 3 heads nodded in enthusiastic unison, their eyes wide with excitement, completely unaware of the high-stakes drama swirling around them. Alexander glanced up at Elena, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Good," Alexander said, his own smile a mixture of fatherly tenderness and fierce determination. "Because I need you to be my special assistants for something that is going to change our lives forever." As the children cheered, delighted by their top-secret assignment, Alexander prepared for the final act of his confrontation. The stage was set. The players were all in position. It was time to raise the curtain on a story of betrayal, reunion, and finally, redemption. The garden of the Monroe estate was a masterpiece of contrived perfection, glowing under the golden light of the Connecticut sunset. Lavish floral arrangements of white calla lilies and pink bougainvillea created an aisle leading to an altar, where an arch woven with thousands of roses awaited the bride and groom. A string quartet, tucked away in a gazebo, began to play a soft, romantic melody as the guests, a curated collection of New York's financial and social elite, resettled into their seats. The wedding ceremony finally commenced, a full 2 hours behind schedule. The delay had ignited a wildfire of speculation among the attendees, with whispers ranging from a wardrobe malfunction to a classic case of cold feet. Not a single person could have conceived of the real drama unfolding behind the mansion's stately walls. Marcus and his discreet security team were positioned strategically throughout the garden, indistinguishable from the guests in their dark suits, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Technicians gave a final check to the enormous LED screens flanking the altar, which the guests had been told were for a romantic video montage. District Attorney Mendez and two plainclothes police officers waited in an adjacent study, ready to move on Alexander's signal. The triplets, looking impossibly handsome in their new miniature suits, sat in the front row between Eleanor and Lucy. They were vibrating with excitement over their secret mission. Though their understanding of it was simple, they had to press a special button when their new friend Alexander gave them a signal. "Do you remember what to do?" Elena whispered, adjusting David's bow tie. "Yes," the three chorused in a loud whisper, clutching the small, sleek remote control Alexander had entrusted to them. Alexander walked to the altar, his stride firm, his expression a calm mask that perfectly concealed the storm within. His bespoke black tuxedo was a stark contrast to his slightly pale complexion, the only outward sign of his tension. At his side, Gabriel Ross stood as his best man, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips, believing he was mere moments away from executing the final phase of his grand betrayal. "You look a little tense, buddy," Gabriel murmured, clapping him on the back. "Perfectly normal, you're about to take the plunge." "Yes," Alexander replied, his voice imbued with a double meaning that was lost on Gabriel. "A plunge that will certainly change a great many lives." The familiar strains of the bridal march began to play, and the entire assembly rose to its feet. Sophia appeared at the end of the aisle, a dazzling vision in a French designer gown. Her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkled. She was playing the part of the adoring bride to perfection. Only a handful of people knew that beneath the silken lace was a heart filled with avarice and a chilling capacity for cruelty. With every step Sophia took toward him, Alexander felt his resolve harden. He was not the naive young man who had been so easily deceived 10 years ago. He would not be betrayed again. When Sophia reached his side, she offered him a calculated, loving smile, which he returned with one of equal, albeit feigned, sincerity. The officiant, a judge and an old friend of the Caldwell family, began the ceremony with solemn words about the sacred bonds of love, trust, and fidelity, an irony so thick it was almost suffocating. "We are gathered here today in the presence of friends and family to join Alexander Monroe and Sophia Caldwell in holy matrimony." The triplets watched everything with rapt attention, not comprehending the gravity of the impending moment. Daniel, ever the most observant, noticed his mother twisting her hands in her lap. The ceremony proceeded to the crucial juncture. "If there is anyone here who can show just cause why this couple should not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace," the judge intoned, reciting the traditional and usually rhetorical question. A slow smile spread across Alexander's face. He looked directly at the front row, at his three sons, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Thrilled to finally execute their mission, the boys simultaneously pressed the large red button on their remote control. Instantly, the two massive screens on either side of the altar flickered to life. But instead of a romantic slideshow, they displayed the grainy, time-stamped security footage from the mansion's office. Sophia's clear, cold voice echoed through the high-end sound system, amplified for all to hear. "The poison will be slow, it will look like a natural illness. In 6 months, we'll be free and rich." The image switched to show Gabriel's reply, his arm around her. "And with the documents I prepared, no one will suspect a thing. His entire empire will be ours." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Hundreds of heads swiveled from the screens to the couple at the altar. Sophia's face had gone from radiant white to a ghostly, mottled grey. Her eyes, moments before warm and loving, were now wide with panic and feral calculation. "This is a lie! It's all a fabrication!" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "It's a deep fake. Alexander is trying to slander me because I discovered his shady business dealings." Gabriel attempted to maintain a shred of composure. "This is obviously doctored footage. The man is having a breakdown. This is utterly ridiculous." Alexander, a portrait of admirable calm, gave another sharper signal. At once, Marcus and his team moved in from the periphery, their movements fluid and practiced. They were accompanied by D.A. Mendez and the two officers, who had shed their guest facades and were now all business. "I have all the evidence necessary," Alexander declared, his voice firm and clear, carrying across the stunned silence, "including pharmacy receipts for the purchase of aconitine from a specialty lab in New Jersey, and the forged documents Gabriel prepared to transfer my assets after my unfortunate and untimely death." Gabriel, seeing the net closing, made a desperate break for it. trying to push his way through the shocked guests. He didn't get 5 feet before 2 of Marcus's men intercepted him, pinning his arms behind his back with brutal efficiency. "Let go of me! You have no right!" he bellowed, his dignity evaporating in a cloud of impotent rage. Sophia, realizing the depths of her miscalculation, switched tactics entirely. Her fury dissolved into a puddle of performative despair. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sank to her knees before Alexander, clutching at his trousers. "Please, Alexander, my love. It was all Gabriel's idea. He manipulated me. He threatened me. You have to believe me. I truly love you." Her desperate, theatrical pleas were a stark, pathetic contrast to the cold, calculating words still looping on the giant screens behind her. D.A. Mendez stepped forward, his expression grim. "Sophia Caldwell, Gabriel Ross, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and felony fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As the officers escorted the 2 sputtering, protesting conspirators away, a stunned, tomb-like silence fell over the garden. Alexander turned to his guests, most of whom were pale and speechless. "I sincerely apologize that you all had to witness such a sordid affair," he said, his voice resonating with quiet dignity. "But at stake was not only my life, but the future of my children, children whose existence I only learned of this very morning." His eyes found Elena's across the stunned crowd. She was looking at him with a mixture of pride, relief, and a love that had weathered a decade of storms. Beside her, the triplets were watching the proceedings with wide-eyed confusion. David, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, asked in a voice that carried clearly through the silence, "Mommy, does this mean there's no more wedding?" A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the audience, breaking the suffocating tension. A real, genuine smile finally broke through Alexander's stoic facade. "No, son," he replied, walking towards them, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "There will be no wedding today, but perhaps one day soon we can celebrate a much more honest one." His gaze met Elena's, and in that silent exchange, they both knew that after 10 long years of separation, lies and pain, the time for truth and reconciliation had finally, blessedly, arrived. The days following the spectacularly failed wedding were a whirlwind of controlled chaos at the Monroe estate. The press, predictably, went into a feeding frenzy. Sensational headlines screamed from tabloids and cable news chyrons, "Billionaire busts murder plot at altar," and "Mogul finds secret heirs, exposes fiancé's deadly scam in wedding day bombshell." Alexander, a veteran of corporate crisis management, handled the media storm with practiced efficiency. A single, concise public statement, a few strategically placed calls to influential editors, and the narrative was contained. What he couldn't control so easily were the unfamiliar, tumultuous emotions that came with the slow, tentative process of getting to know his sons. Elena and the triplets remained at the mansion, their temporary stay extending indefinitely, while Sophia and Gabriel faced the grim reality of the justice system. The evidence against them was overwhelming. They were remanded to custody without bail. The enormous house, which days before had been a sterile monument to a single man's ambition, began to transform. The hushed, lonely corridors, once accustomed only to the quiet footsteps of staff and the murmur of business calls, now echoed with the joyous, uninhibited sounds of children's laughter. On the 3rd morning at the vast breakfast table, Damien and David were enthusiastically devouring a mountain of pancakes prepared by the mansion's chef, while Daniel was lost in a world of his own, drawing intently in a sketchbook. Alexander, feeling his way through the new and uncharted territory of fatherhood, decided to venture a step forward. "So, what do you guys think of soccer?" he asked, searching for common ground. "We love it," the 3 replied in a boisterous, perfectly synchronized chorus, their enthusiasm so pure it sent a pang of joy through Alexander's chest. "We're huge fans of the Philadelphia Union," David added, always the spokesman. "Daniel's the goalie on our school team and I'm a striker." "I just play sometimes," Damian chimed in shyly, not looking up from his drawing. "I like reading graphic novels more." Alexander smiled, fascinated by the discovery of their distinct personalities, a trinity of individuals housed in identical forms. "What if we had a game this afternoon? In the garden," he proposed. "There's a small pitch just past the pool." The boy's eyes lit up as if he had offered them the keys to a candy factory. That afternoon, under the warm Connecticut sun, Alexander found himself clumsily chasing a soccer ball, dressed in athletic wear for the first time, in what felt like a decade. The boys, possessed of a seemingly infinite supply of energy, ran circles around him. Pass it, David yelled, while Daniel, with surprising agility, dove to block another of Alexander's clumsy attempts at a goal. Dad, you're too slow, Damian shouted with a giggle, dribbling the ball effortlessly past him. Alexander stopped dead in his tracks. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the game fading into a dull hum. Dad. It was the first time one of them had called him that. The word had slipped out so naturally, so unconsciously from his son's lips. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. I'm a little rusty, Alexander called back, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. I promise I'll get better with practice. From the mansion's sprawling stone terrace, Eleanor watched the scene unfold, her eyes shimmering with tears. She had never, not even in her wildest dreams, allowed herself to imagine this. Her sons, happy and carefree, playing with their real father. Seeing Alexander, the formidable tycoon, the titan of industry, rolling around on the grass with his children like any ordinary father, reawakened feelings she had kept carefully buried for years. After the game, when the boys had been whisked away by Ramon for lemonade and a snack, Alexander joined Elena on the terrace. The setting sun was painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Thank you, he said softly, leaning on the balustrade beside her. For what? She asked, genuinely surprised. For not giving up on them, for raising them into the incredible boys they are, for bringing them to me, even when you had every reason to believe I only wanted to hurt you. Eleanor offered a small, shy smile, her gaze fixed on the horizon. A part of me, I suppose, always hoped we might find our way back to each other one day, not for my sake, but for theirs. And what about for our sake? He asked, his voice raw, turning to look at her. Do you think there's anything left to salvage between us? The vulnerability in his voice startled her. This wasn't the ruthless businessman who dominated boardrooms. This was Alex, the ambitious, passionate young man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. Is it even possible? She asked, allowing her own vulnerability to show for the first time since her arrival. After everything that's happened? I never stopped loving you, Elena, he confessed, gently taking her hand. His touch was warm, familiar. Even when I thought I hated you, it was just a wounded love lashing out. Now that I know the truth, now that I see the strength it took for you to protect me, to raise our sons alone, I'm in awe of you. The ensuing silence was not empty, but filled with the weight of unspoken words and a decade of lost possibilities. I never stopped loving you either, she admitted at last, her voice barely a whisper. Every time I saw your name in the news, or your picture in a magazine, it was like a physical pain in my chest. And every time one of the boys did something, a certain laugh, a stubborn tilt of the head, that reminded me of you, I would wonder if they would ever know the man they came from. Alexander moved closer, his eyes reflecting the fiery sunset and a yearning that spanned 10 years. I want to know them, Elena. I want to be a part of their lives, every single day. And if you'll let me, I want to try and rebuild what we lost, one day at a time. From somewhere inside the vast mansion, the sound of the boys' laughter drifted out to them, a perfect, poignant reminder of everything that was at stake. That night, long after the triplets had fallen asleep exhausted from their day of play and excitement, Alexander and Elena sat in the mansion's cavernous library. With mugs of hot chocolate in hand, they talked until the first light of dawn, painstakingly piecing together the separate puzzles of their lives. She told him about the boys' first years, how Daniel was the first to walk but the last to talk, how David was the natural-born leader, always instigating their adventures, and how Damian, the quietest, would surprise everyone with his boundless imagination. Alexander, in turn, shared his own struggles, the bitterness and isolation of his early success, the way he had to reinvent himself after her father's sabotage, and how every professional triumph had been shadowed by a profound personal emptiness he could never quite name. As the night wore on and the confessions flowed, they made a startling discovery. Despite the years, the miles, the lies and the pain, the core of what they had felt for each other had remained dormant but intact, like a seed waiting for the right conditions to finally grow. When the first rays of sun slanted through the library windows, they realized they had talked the entire night away. They were exhausted, but for the first time in a decade, they both felt a sense of profound peace. They shared a look that was a silent promise. This time, no one and nothing would ever tear them apart again. 3 months later, the Monroe estate was a different world. The cold, austere silence of a lonely man's trophy home had been replaced by the warm, vibrant chaos of a family. The walls that had once been silent witnesses to ambition and betrayal now absorbed the sounds of board games, arguments over television shows, and the nightly ritual of bedtime stories. The triplets had acclimated to their new life with the remarkable resilience of children. The swimming pool, the home theater, the endless gardens, and most importantly, the constant presence of a father they adored, had them completely captivated. They attended a top private school now, making new friends and facing new challenges, though Alexander had been insistent that they maintain their old friendships from Philadelphia. "Dad, look what I made in art class," Damian exclaimed one afternoon, racing into Alexander's office and proudly presenting a colorful drawing. "It's our family," the little boy explained, pointing to 5 crudely drawn stick figures standing in front of a very large house. "You, Mom, my brothers, and me." Alexander stared at the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. No multi-billion-dollar merger had ever made him feel this rich. He carefully pinned it to the corkboard behind his desk, right next to his most prestigious business awards. The most profound change, however, was in Alexander himself. The relentless tycoon had shocked everyone, including himself, by embracing fatherhood with a fierce, all-consuming dedication. He completely restructured his work life, delegating major responsibilities he had once hoarded and creating a schedule that revolved around his family. "Mr. Monroe, the board meeting has been moved to 10 a.m. as you requested," Ramon confirmed one morning. "Perfect," Alexander replied, glancing at his watch. "That gives me enough time to drop the boys at school." For a man who had famously claimed that sleep is a negotiable luxury and family is a distraction, this transformation was nothing short of revolutionary. His partners and employees, after their initial shock, adapted to the new Alexander Monroe, a man who might arrive later, but worked with a renewed, sharper focus, a man who now understood the importance of making it home for dinner. Eleanor, who had settled with the boys into a wing of the mansion that she was slowly redecorating to feel like a home, watched this metamorphosis with quiet joy. She was undergoing her own transformation as well. With Alexander's encouragement, she had enrolled in online courses to complete the architecture degree she had abandoned years ago. Latent talents and forgotten dreams were beginning to bloom. One sunny Sunday afternoon, while the boys were having a swimming lesson in the pool, Alexander led Elena on a walk through the gardens. They strolled in comfortable silence, ending up in a secluded section of the property she had never seen before. "Close your eyes," he said, taking her arm to guide her the last few steps. When she opened them, she was standing before a beautiful, newly constructed glass greenhouse, filled with exotic orchids and tropical plants. Sunlight streamed through the panes, creating a serene, magical atmosphere. "Do you remember?" he asked, watching her reaction intently. "How we used to talk about having a place just like this one day?" A slow, beautiful smile spread across Elena's face. She was deeply moved. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," he said, taking both of her hands in his. "Our dreams, our plans, and we lost so much time, Elena, but we can still get it back." To her astonishment, he knelt on one knee before her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "This isn't a marriage proposal, not yet," he clarified with a slightly nervous smile. "This is a promise that this time I will never let you go. A promise that we will build the family we always dreamed of together." He opened the box. Nestled inside was a delicate ring with a brilliant green emerald. It was identical to the one he had pointed out to her in a shop window in Philadelphia, a lifetime ago when they were young and full of impossible dreams. Tears of joy streaming down her face, Elena pulled him to his feet and into a fierce embrace. "We already are a family," she whispered against his shoulder. "We just have to keep writing our story." That evening at dinner, Alexander clinked his glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. "Your mother and I have something important to tell you," he announced, looking at the 3 pairs of identical dark eyes watching him expectantly. "We've decided that we're all going to be together, the 5 of us, as a proper family." David, ever the pragmatist, asked, "So does that mean you're officially our dad now?" Alexander felt that familiar lump rise in his throat. "I've always been your father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't have the good fortune to know it." The boys exchanged a quick, silent look, and then, as if on a secret cue, they all rose from their chairs and rushed to envelop their parents in a chaotic 5-person hug. In that warm, tangled embrace, the last of the old wounds finally began to heal. The legal proceedings against Sophia and Gabriel ground on, but they felt increasingly distant from the family's daily life. They were a dark chapter, but a closed one. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, was steadily giving way to a bright present and an even more promising future. Instead of an empire built on a foundation of revenge, Alexander now presided over something infinitely more precious: a second chance. A chance to love and be loved, to be the father his sons deserved, and the partner he had always longed to be. And for Elena, his partner in all things, she could finally rest, knowing that the sacrifices she had made had not been in vain. The love they had tried to destroy had survived against all odds, and was now blooming, stronger and truer than ever before. The grand estate in the Connecticut hills, once a symbol of power and status, had finally become what they had both dreamed of all those years ago: a home, a sanctuary where love, not money, was the true measure of wealth. As he watched his family gathered in the living room that night, Alexander Monroe understood that he had gained something his fortune could never buy: the peace of a man who, after having lost everything, had finally found it all.